Welcome, everyone. This is Agile Outcomes. Today, we have a special guest. Justin Woods is here, and he's going to open our eyes about the world of road mapping. Justin, would you like to introduce yourself?
Fantastic. Daniel, thank you so much. So hi, my name is Justin Woods. I'm the owner of Roadmap Heroes. Roadmap Heroes is a road mapping consultancy that helps companies to plan strategy, track execution, and communicate clearly using road mapping tools. I've spent the last 20 years in the tech space in a number of different roles, from development through to product management, and really excited to speak with you today, Daniel. Thank you.
Awesome. Hey, that's a good intro. Can you tell us how you got to this point? Because I have a feeling you and I have a shared background.
Yeah, we do. I started off probably way back in my career as a developer. So my university degree was in software engineering. I loved coding and development, and so I got into it that way. And then after university, I was looking for my first full-time role, got into application support with Dell. They were looking for a 3-month kind of consulting period, contracting period. So I got in there, and then ended up renewing a couple of times and ended up in application support for about 4 years. But that was kind of my initial story, was getting into software development, and it's still a passion of mine today.
And then from that, it led to
product management, really, quite quickly.
Okay.
Working in application support, I was supporting a lot of the applications and tools that were used by product managers at Dell. So, when things went wrong, we were there to support them. And it was through interactions with these people that I started to learn about the product management role way back in sort of 2003, sometimes for many companies, they hadn't even heard of it. But what was the real appeal for me was the ability it was the intersection between technology and people. So being able to understand what people wanted, to be able to look after those capabilities, and actually to own something was the thing that I really found attractive. It was to take ownership of something, be accountable and responsible for it. And working with product managers more and more, I was just like, this is the next step of my career. So fortunately got an internal interview, ended up working within the product management team for the team that looked after all of the commerce engine and the commerce sites for Dell in Europe, Middle East, and Africa.
Wow. Okay, so that must have been a sizable jump from programming.
Right. It was very, very different. But what was nice is to bring the transferable skills of understanding, hugely technical environments, understanding the servers as well. So for me, the step then was the next bit I needed to learn actually was stakeholder management, prioritization, training, requirements, and all of the other good things that we have with product management. But it was a great privilege, and one that was sort of career shaping for me.
I'm curious if you could imagine have gotten to that same position otherwise through a different channel. Like, had you gone to business school or something, would it have been the same?
That's a lovely question. I'd like to think so. I'd like to think that there were always paths taking me back to product management. And in fact, later on in my career, when I was unfortunately made redundant from Dell through global code bases and consolidating, I actually had a brief interim kind of journey around requirements analysis and business analysis, requirements engineering and business analysis, because back in 2008, to early 2010s, product management wasn't still well known. So I wasn't sure how to label myself. So I went around those different disciplines, and then a contact and a mutual friend, a friend, let me know that there was a product management position back at Vodafone UK. And I jumped straight back into the chance and got my feet under the table again.
Nice. And I'm guessing these days it's pretty commonplace, right? There's not a lot of confusion about product manager role.
I don't think so. I think there's product management now is much better defined, although I still think the discipline was done for many, many years before product management was even a thing, product marketing and things like that. I think maybe different frameworks and tools have given more roles to product management. So product owners, technical product managers, but I think the discipline is pretty well defined now, yeah.
Okay, so that brings us fairly up to date, except where does the connection with road mapping come in?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for me, it came back to my second round with product management. So I was then at Vodafone UK, building up a product management team. And really, as the team grew, it became necessary for me to look at the portfolio of applications that I looked after and the roadmaps there. So the team grew, the portfolio grew, and I started to, come up against challenges with trying to manage these things in the various tools that I had available. Product managers typically, or people when they work for companies, will have access to the Microsoft suite of tools and things like that. But you sometimes need to start to get something a little bit more specialized. So I did some research, found out about this road mapping tool called AHA, started to implement it within Vodafone, and then kind of fell in love with the tool really and what it enabled me to do. Not necessarily the functionality of the tool, but what I was able to do with my team and stakeholders. And then I joined AHA as an early employee and worked there for 3 years as a road mapping expert, helping other PMs like myself get up to speed with the tools. And then really to the present day, the next step for there was then to start up my own consultancy, Roadmap Heroes, and to be able to help teams more intimately and also a bit more agnostically. The tool is never really the silver bullet, and so sometimes you want to have some good frameworks and processes in place. And Daniel, I think that's where we riff off each other in terms of our backgrounds, because that's something you're really passionate about as well.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so then real quick for the audience, myself included, how would you describe, what's a brief overview of road mapping?
Yeah, I think it's better to be thought of more as a process than an artifact or a deliverable or a diagram. I think many things get misconstrued or misunderstood, and I'm sure we'll dive into, safe and agile and things like that over time. But essentially for me, the essence of road mapping is that it's a process that is really the most important piece. Road mapping is about planning. It's about looking aspirationally about where we want to go within a certain time frame and say that's our direction. And you can do that again with similar tools, OKRs or goals, initiatives and things like that. But for me, it's really putting a point in the distance and saying that's where we want to get to. How should we get there? But importantly, it's not defining the exact steps that we need to get there. It's more around what problems do we need to solve in order to help us to get to that point. And so road mapping is more around planning. It's around aligning teams, because you're going to need many teams to help you to get to that point. Often you do. I think there's also an element of roadmaps for me that I'm quite passionate about, which is the storytelling aspect. It should be compelling. It should help our internal business and our external customers understand where we want to get to and roughly how we might think about getting there. And it's really a communication tool as well. A roadmap, a key part of that roadmap is to make sure that everyone understands where we need to get to, and having a little bit of latitude to have some fun maybe in that roadmap. One roadmap that I've seen was a solar system, and the different planets was how far we were going to go out to get there.
I like that.
Bringing some storytelling to these things, I think, is nice as well. So that's how I would describe road mapping, more of a process than a single document. But I'm sure our minds and your audience's minds might go to a certain Gantt chart maybe as a roadmap, and I really want people to reconsider that.
That's great. That's helpful. Now, you mentioned OKRs just now. How would road mapping tie into OKRs?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I still think that, there's lots of different artifacts that we might have. We might have a vision statement or a strategic document that has, where we want to get to. It might have some goals, some initiatives in there, OKRs as well. I think OKRs, when spaced out over a period of time, are almost showing a level of a roadmap. It's showing these are the things that we want to achieve in a certain period of time. And so I like to see those things on the roadmap, because they are the flags, they're the markers that we want to be able to get to. The gaps between those, for me, is the roadmap. That's why we want to get there. It's the problems we want to solve in a certain logical order. But I think the problem with roadmaps often is that they become very static. And so people's understanding of a roadmap becomes more of a delivery plan. And that's really not how it should be. It should be, these are the OKRs we want to achieve and what we think we need to do or explore or discover in order to get there. It's our best view of what we know now.
Actually, that's a great segue, because I was going to ask you about the connection between road mapping and like continuous discovery and design thinking. How do those all tie into each other?
I think for me, and maybe incorrectly for many of the roadmap purists out there, but the roadmap is just the thing that describes, a set of things in a certain order, much like a backlog might be. We could argue that the roadmap is just a horizontal backlog. But for me, it's pulling in those things of saying, look, we don't have the resources to be able to do everything at once. So these are the things that we know we want to tackle in an order. And some of those things, we might go off into completely different areas. You mentioned discovery and, continuous learning and design thinking. And I think we should capture some of that in our roadmap. We should actually say, we are going to go and explore this unknown area. That's what's next on our roadmap. After that, we might do something with that learning, or we might not. And so capturing those in, I think, is really important. And we can actually roadmap anything. Often when people think about roadmaps, they might think of a literal roadmap. I don't think we should really think of a roadmap in that way. I think it's a bad name and a bad analogy. It should be really the set of outcomes that you want to achieve.
Okay.
And also maybe a little bit less about execution, because design thinking is kind of a framework around how we might tackle something. So I think the two absolutely can coexist.
I was going to ask you that. So the question I was going to put to you is, what is on the roadmap?
Right.
Some people might argue a roadmap is a list of features for a product out into the future. But I'm gathering from you that it's more or less basically your vision of where you're going, which involves experimentation, you mentioned outcomes.
Right.
So it's not as precise, or it's not as prescriptive, maybe I should say, as a roadmap of features.
Absolutely. And I think this is where folks make those types of mistakes and get into a lot of hot water, myself included. In my first product management role, I thought, when I was asked for a roadmap, I created an 18-month delivery plan that looked like a Gantt chart. And then when I couldn't deliver that, because the massive number of things that were required in order to make that happen, and the fact that I didn't circulate it enough, just reflected badly on me and made that a problem. So I think driving a differentiation, for me, a roadmap would be something that is a bridge between strategy and execution. Gianna Basto often talks about it as a prototype for your strategy. And I really love that. Here's what we think it might look like to get there. But as we start to maybe bring Gantts and dates and features in, that's more of a delivery plan, which is fine, but by its nature really should be in only what we can see and view and understand now, maybe the next 2 to 3 months of a delivery plan. And that's okay. But I think they're two very different artifacts that serve two really different purposes.
So perhaps there's this long-term roadmap for the experiments or outcomes or discovery,
right?
But maybe in addition, perhaps adjacent to it, there's a delivery plan, maybe just addressing the items on the very left-hand side, the immediate 2 to 3 months.
Yeah,
and exactly. You wouldn't go any further out than that.
Not really. And I think that's the important thing, to bring in a very relevant scenario for myself. I'm going away on holiday next week and I'm really looking forward to it. A roadmap for me might be that within that period of time, or with that event, I want to go and have a good time with my friends. I want to make sure that the dogs get some exercise. I want to make sure that, we have some enjoyable meals together. Those are the high level outcomes that I'm wanting to achieve. The delivery plan might actually then outline how I'm going to get physically to that place. It might actually say which place I'm going to go to walk the dog, or which restaurant I'm going to go to have a meal. And as soon as you're more specific around there, of course, there's latitude to make mistakes or for things to go wrong. So that for me would be an outcome-based roadmap for my holiday. Would be, these are the things that I want to, the outcomes I want to have. I want to have a nice time. The implementation of that can be done in many different ways.
So here's a question. Could you be successful on your roadmap but fail in your delivery plan? Or are those not consistent with each other?
Oh, that's such a good question. I think you can, because I think often the reason why people fail in their roadmaps is that they are a delivery plan and it's too prescriptive. I think if you provide the latitude to have an outcome, which is our customers should have a convenient way to log into our website. And through the delivery, you look at, well, do we create our own single sign-on or our own identity management system, and it fails? So we go and use another vendor's and then that works. I think that's absolutely okay. You can still achieve the same outcome. It might have taken a bit longer, but you've not necessarily failed. But you're right, there should be a coupling between them. This is the outcome that we wanted to achieve, and these are the solutions that we have tried to implement in order to get to that overall outcome.
Nice. Yeah. So that to me explains how you have the ability to have experimentation,
right,
which means potential failure, right?
Yes.
Or learning, you take away, it's like, actually, we don't want to go down that path. Even though it succeeded, we're thinking there's a better solution.
Right.
So that to me would resolve the apparent contradiction between the two.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's also the one thing that people trip up on and maybe make the mistake on, which is why outcome-based road mapping has become so popular, because it shows an overall trajectory without those kind of points. But I'm a strong believer that we should have things like experimentation and discovery on the roadmap, because you want to communicate to your internal stakeholders that, we don't know these things. We've not done these things before. So to boldly state that we know that this functionality is going to take exactly 3.5 months to implement, like we've done it many, many times, I think is often a pain point for product managers.
So I'm curious Justin, how do you see this play out with your clients? Is this well received, or is it a struggle for them?
I think it's definitely a journey for my clients. I typically work with people that work on product roadmaps, but also they can be marketing roadmaps and technology roadmaps. And I see that this either comes from top down or bottom up. So top down is that leadership want to see what the teams are working on and why. And bottom up, the teams want to be able to understand what is strategically important for us. Why are we working on this stuff? Mm-hmm. One of the best ways to prioritize your backlog is to understand what it aligns to strategically. Should we even be doing this stuff at all?
Right.
And so it's kind of those two different levels that I tend to work with. And then the other problem tends to be, what does the rest of the business understand? It's very good for me to go in and speak to a product management team or product team around outcome-based road mapping, let's say, but that might be very difficult for the rest of the organization to get on board, because they might find it too woolly, too ambiguous. The sales team can't possibly put a target or sell this outcome when they're used to having a feature roadmap. So again, much like in your space, Daniel, there's an evolution and a learning that the rest of the wider company and sometimes even the external customers have to go through.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I'm wondering, have you ever seen a case where this has been successfully sort of evangelized with actual customers? So customers of your customers basically buy into it, and then you see kind of the trio working together.
I've seen examples of both, actually. Yeah, you're quite right. Some of my clients aren't B2B or B2C, sorry, so they don't share some of their roadmaps there. But I think one of them was a client that moved to Scaled Agile. And Scaled Agile talks us to, within the business, to think about the program increment, right? It's that bigger mm-hmm. cadence that the business operates. But that was a very difficult thing for them to then share with their external customers, because they were very much used to saying, well, when is release 13.7 coming out?
When's the ultimate deliverable?
When's that going to come? And it's almost, you have to take the customer along that journey as well. And I think that's an evolution. I've not worked with that client for a little while now, but I know that they are on that path. Whereas sometimes when you're working maybe more B2C, and your customers or your customers are more used to maybe like the SaaS delivery model, they become a little bit more uncoupled from when is the next release, and mm-hmm. naturally they tend to be a little bit more feature or functionality oriented. But mm-hmm. it is definitely, it affects much wider than the product team, the company, and even the customer.
Good stuff. Now, I think this is appropriate juncture to get into sort of the overlap, road mapping and Agile. We've been talking about it a bit already. I'm curious, you mentioned something earlier about sort of the excitement about getting into product and really owning product. Mm-hmm. And then in Agile, starting with Scrum, you have the product owner role. So did it ever dawn on you that those two were kind of in synergy with each other?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think where I would come back to is that in my first role as a product manager, we were just starting to embrace Agile. But a lot of my deliverables were from global teams that were creating. So I was almost a level of abstraction away from Agile through global product managers and third parties. And in fact, I might use that to excuse myself from the time when I was a product manager later on, because as a product manager, I was actually leading a team, and our teams were working with solution partners or systems integrators. And so actually we were almost a level away from being product managers that built physical tools using software, and more interfacing with the providers. And that left us almost a level of abstraction away from Agile and how the implementation is there. But the way I do see it is that, for me, product management is really the ownership of a product or a service, and that doesn't always have to be software. So I think the planning and the road mapping of that can happen agnostic of maybe execution. And then you might find that then Agile picks up on some of those pieces and says, right, these are some of the goals of the sprint, or these are some of the outcomes that we want to achieve, and then brings that down more into the world of execution. And there may well be product managers out there that are almost, their execution is a hybrid of, it might be some Agile, some waterfall, and even a systems integrator that they don't actually get to see how things are built.
Very interesting. Have you ever gotten into the situation where you were more closely aligned or embedded with the team? So as the team, the engineers are looking to you and saying, hey, Justin, where's this going? What is the evolution of this product? Or has it been still abstracted away?
A little bit abstracted, but in that instance, it was more where I was a manager of a product manager that interfaced directly with the development teams. And what was important then was to be able to provide that longer term vision and why we're doing stuff. You know, engineers do a great job. They work really hard at kind of building the stuff, but it's a really kind thing, and it's motivating to them to understand why they're putting in this hard graft and where we're going to take it. So what was important was, you know, sometimes we work hard and there can be tough times. There's bits where we all have to, you know, get together in order to overcome some challenges, and understanding why we're overcoming those challenges is really motivating and provides energy. So whilst I wasn't directly looking after those engineering teams, through my product manager, we needed to be able to set a clear path and direction for them.
Gotcha. Have you ever seen the case? Because I'm always happily surprised when I find this. Have you ever seen the case where you had product ideas originate from the team?
Absolutely. And I think that's massively important as well. You know, no one understands the product often as well as the teams that create and use it. We might get interesting feedback externally, but I'm a big advocate when I work with my clients to create some innovation process, because some of the ideas from the team today is the company's innovation for tomorrow. And so I think that's a really important thing, is to capture that, but balance that then with not just an internal pet project. It does need to align with where the business wants to go and everything else. But where that idea is born, absolutely. You know, some really exciting stuff comes from internally.
Let's get into, okay, this is probably the elephant in the room. So in the press lately, last few months, maybe even year, if you want to go back, there's been a lot of Agile bashing in the news.
Right.
And I'm curious if that's spilled over in road mapping as well, or what's your perspective on it?
Yeah, I think both can be misunderstood and misinterpreted, and any tool used incorrectly is not going to provide a great outcome for people. I know that for some people it might be a preference, or they've had a bad experience with something, but I don't think that's an opportunity to say that one of these tools or methodologies is inherently bad. And I totally agree. I've seen that myself with certainly with road mapping. You know, people created an 18th month delivery plan, which they sold as a roadmap and weren't able to deliver it. I see it with SAFe and certainly, you know, a bubbling up of Agile as well. But I think we need to be really clear on why we need this tool and what the tool's going to do for us. And I think sometimes they're misunderstood, or the expectations aren't well managed around them, because, you know, I'm sure in some instances that, you know, SAFe might actually be better than what the company was doing before. It might not be someone else's choice and they might have a different view, but actually for that company, it could be exactly what they need. And so I don't think we should be too, because it provides a framework sometimes, or a governance around a lot of madness that might, you know, a lot of dysfunction within these companies that exists. And so what it says is, look, hey, we've got this framework. These are the ways that we suggest you should do things. And by the way, I've never seen Agile or any other tool implemented exactly as the provider or the framework owner says that it should be. We should always pick and choose. And I think we should be much more empowered to say, we're adopting this framework. We like these bits of it because they work for us, and we don't like these bits of it because they don't work for us, and be really happy with that. But just to throw away a blanket of scaled agile or agile is bad, I think is missing the point.
And would they do the same thing with road mapping? They'd see a delivery plan, for example, disguising itself as a roadmap of outcomes, and they'd say, hey, we tried it, we missed our dates,
Right.
road mapping is terrible, so kind of throw out the baby with the bathwater type of thing.
I think it often gets done. It's just misunderstood. If you try and use a fork as a spoon, you're not going to be very successful. And I think it's the same thing. Understand what that tool was really intended for and how you're going to use it, and make sure it's the right fit, and just be really curious about these things. What you mentioned, but just throwing it away and saying roadmap is inherently bad, I think could be really damaging for companies where actually it would be really good.
Exactly. So how do you go into an engagement like that? Where do you even start with the tool, or do you even start with the concepts, kind of the principles?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think for me, the majority of my time is, because I'm an AHA expert, I'm brought in because AHA is already a foregone conclusion. It's already implemented, or at least chosen, and a budget for it. And so when I come in, it is part of the tooling stack, and I need to therefore help them to implement it there. But where my preference would really be, and why I founded Roadmap Heroes, is to get ahead of those conversations, and maybe even get ahead of the processes. What I've found is often that I'm brought in to implement AHA, but what I find is that either AHA might not be the right tool, or that their processes internally might not be mature enough to actually implement into the tool. And so that's really where I'd like to get to, but you need a greater awareness up front with your clients and potential customers.
That makes total sense. It's almost like they're looking as the tools, the silver bullet, so to speak.
Right. Well, it's the thing that's easy to go and acquire, right? You can go online, do a little bit of research, sign up with a credit card, or get a 30-day free trial, and in you go. And I won't disagree that some of these tools can bring in some form of process themselves, and that's great. It might bring in some form of product life cycle, but really we shouldn't rely on that. And we should really start very simply around what we need and think more about our internal process, because you can create a great roadmap using PowerPoint.
Good point. All right, so let's talk about your clients. When you're working with a client, everyone's different. You said that there's no one size fits all process. So how do you work with your clients?
It depends. I think that's a great consultant or classic product management answer, but it does really depend. Sometimes they will have an implementation of AHA, and we need to either reboot it or we need to change it in some way. And that's very different from a net new implementation. So it typically in those times, I will understand what are our key objectives and, or outcomes, if you will, and what does good look like? What does that success look like? That then helps me to understand where I need to get to. Now, I don't create a roadmap necessarily to get us there, but in my mind, there needs to be a series of steps that will get us to those points. And in my proposals, I might actually say, right, these are the 6 things we want to achieve. Here's the order that I think we should achieve those.
What do you find that a lot of your clients are looking for? What does good look like to them?
I think a lot of it is either bottom-up efficiencies or top-down visibility. I think that's the most succinct way I can put it. It's either comes from teams that are struggling to manage using standard office-based tools, Excel, Word, PowerPoint, Miro, maybe, those types of things. They've outgrown the tool to support them with their road mapping needs, and they need to find something better to get efficiencies. You'll often talk about product managers don't have time to update the roadmap or time to do the roadmap. Then that can be a big challenge. The other thing might be top down, which is the leadership teams just say, our teams are really busy. and I can't see what they roll up to and what they're working on. And so it can either come from one or both of those, but that's typically where I'm brought in. Of course, you then need to sell to the other half why it's going to be a benefit to them. When I say sell, I didn't really mean that specific word, but you need to be able to help them understand why that tool would be useful.
Yeah, they need to buy in at some point.
Right, exactly. Buy-in is exactly the word.
And then let's say, let's talk about where this needs to go next. We were talking earlier about measuring engagements, and how do you know if the whole engagement has been successful or not? Is it a gut feel? Is it, you have a data-driven solution here?
Sometimes it can be really difficult to get the client themselves to quantify what benefits they've realized. And you must have this in your space as well, Daniel. Once we've implemented a framework successfully, to be able to say, well, often the client isn't able to say that's given us a 33% increase in velocity, or that's given us a 25% increase in communication. They're not able to translate that. And so sometimes it can be a subjective type thing. What I'm trying to lean towards with my implementations, and especially like you said, what does that implementation look like? It can really depend, but almost to go in at the beginning and say, I could say, what are your outcomes that you want to achieve and how are we going to measure them? But often they're not able to articulate that. But I think one thing that might be useful is to create maybe a scorecard or some type of survey tool that at least helps to make the subjective more objective. If we can't say that we got better at road mapping by 17%, maybe we can just say how the team overall felt road mapping process works for them before and how it works after, and be able to capture that. I think that's the ongoing challenge, especially when the realization of the benefit and a reporting of that doesn't lie within you or I. It's from the client. It kind of puts it on them to be able to justify, but often they can't.
So would you do something like a net promoter score, for example, NPS?
Yeah, I think you could.
Or something more like a survey with actual set of questions.
Right. I think I'd want to dive a little bit deeper than NPS, because you and I can have a chuckle about, how limited that can be at times. But I think I'd want to go into the key areas of road mapping, or the areas of road mapping as I see them, and kind of dig down a little bit. For me, and I've thought about this a long time, road mapping is kind of about 6 different areas. So high level strategy, exploration, managing requests, organizing your roadmap, evolving your roadmap, and then sharing it. And handily, that mnemonic is HEROES, from Roadmap Heroes, so HEROES.
Nice.
But I think that's really important, because you need to look at all of those areas. And so maybe asking some questions, at least into that level. How easy, how visible was strategy before the road mapping process and afterwards? How better able are we to capture requests in a structured way? Like you said, innovation internally, and bring that into the roadmap. How were we able to do that before and now? Is it repeatable, for instance? I think asking some questions in those 6 kind of headers would give me confidence that I've at least been able to move the dial for road mapping for that company.
Great. No, I love the mnemonic. That's fantastic.
Thank you.
HEROES. Little did I know the entire time it was right there on your shirt. Okay, so now this getting more personal. I think this is fun. So tell me what motivates you. How do you drive yourself to all your business endeavors, and how do you get up in the morning?
I think for me, it's making a difference. That's the big thing that I love doing. I love to be able to make people's lives better, whether that's in my personal life or my professional life, and to be able to help the Justin Woodses of 10 years ago to be the person that shows them that there's a better way. I think for me, that's the privilege. Product managers, and you'll get this as well, product teams, engineering. And when I say product teams, I don't just mean product managers, it's engineering teams, all of the peripheral teams associated with product management and product delivery work really, really hard. And so to be able to show them that there is a better way to do things, to provide clarity on prioritization so that we reduce engineering waste or things like that, to be able to show them there's a better way, and I've learned this and I want to share it with people, for me is probably one of the most motivating things I can do. So I'm intrinsically motivated by my role, and that's what makes me get out of bed in the morning and wear a very bright yellow t-shirt.
Fantastic. All right. Well, I think that covers it. Justin Woods, any other parting words of wisdom?
No, I think it's just, I'd probably say from a road mapping perspective, just product manage your road mapping process. For the product managers that are listening, or the experts that are familiar with product management, we need to be curious. We need to discover and learn. So why not apply that to road mapping, or why not apply that to your life? So I think make sure that product management or road mapping, is a process. Don't get distracted by the tools and frameworks. Start very simple. Start with the most basic thing that you can and learn and iterate from there. And I think if you had that approach with most things in life, I think people would do really well.
Well said. I will take that to heart myself. As far as your business, as far as Road Mapping Heroes go, are there any links or any references you want me to include?
Yeah, of course. No, thank you. That's a really kind offer. I think for folks where our discussion has resonated with them, feel free to go to my website, which is roadmapheroes.com. Daniel, I'm sure you'll be kind enough to put a link in the description. If you want to connect with me directly, I'm Justin Woods on LinkedIn, and you'll probably find equally loud branding on my LinkedIn page. But again, if you provide a link down below, and I think just reach out and have a conversation. I'm always happy to chat with people, share ideas, because that's how I've learned myself.
There you have it. Justin Woods, the man, the myth, Roadmap Heroes. I hope you enjoyed this session. My name's Daniel Spencer. This is Agile Outcomes. Thanks for being with us today.
Thanks, Daniel. Take care.